While we're on the topic of insulin, Dave, do you mind if I hijack the conversation and ask the question that one of our listeners asked? So someone asked, what would be the benefits and negatives of using insulin on all training days as opposed to only on high days? He's currently in prep using both insulin and GH for the first time. He said his carbs are still at a decent rate. He's been using insulin pre and post workout, making some really great gains and look better. Would you suggest I only run the insulin on high days as opposed to how he's doing it now?
I would, and I'll give a couple of reasons why. One, if you go online, what's the first thing you hear as a dose, as a protocol with insulin? Use it with your workouts. And so that's what everyone does, and everyone doesn't look good. So there's probably a different approach. So let's look why there's a different approach. So you don't just grow when you're like, we have this weird thing because we lift weights to build muscle. We think everything happens with the workouts. I have a client right now whose training workload is so insane, and I keep telling him to back down. He wants to train 7 days a week, like 12 sets of squats 3 days a week, just too much workload. And you don't progress that way. You don't. We think it's all training, and we focus other things, everything around the training. People think they should take their orals before training. The orals increase protein synthesis. Yes, you might get some androgenic effects that improve training, but that improves your training. That doesn't necessarily improve the fact that you're synthesizing muscle from the training after the training. You want everything should be focused around the food. And so doing that, that's great. The insulin's around training, but it's not improving your training. And let's say that using insulin, doubles your rate of growth. Well, you're not really eating during training, so you lose that hour, but let's ignore that. And let's say you do it just to make the numbers easy, you do it just around training. Let's say you use like Humalive, and you get about roughly a 3-hour active effective life. So you use it every day, 5 days a week with training, you get 15 hours a week of insulin being effective, right? But you take insulin every single day you train. You take insulin 5 days a week. That's going to have, that's an impact on your blood sugar levels, at insulin every single day. Now, let's do the extreme opposite and say you only take it 1 day a week, and you only take it on high days. And so because you don't really get, it's not just 3 hours, but if you only take one dose, you get like a dose curve like this, and it starts trailing off. And it takes for a long time, 6 or 7 or 8 hours to all the way go to zero. But those towards that, after about the 3 hour point, you're not really getting much. You get a little bit, but not enough to really cause the benefit. Now, let's say you take it 3 times a day on a high day, you get those 3-hour blips each one. That's 9 hours. So that's less than 15, but that first dose trails off, right? And then you take that first dose with that you get that added effectiveness, and now that puts you above like the dose response curve for a longer period of time. And then you get the same thing that trails off in the third one. And so really you don't get 3 separate 3-hour spikes for 9 hours. You almost get like one long 18-hour burst. Yeah, so you get like 18 hours where enough of the insulin is in your bloodstream to cause an effective response, as far as increased amino acid uptake at the cell, decreased loss of use of breaking down muscle for energy, increased glycogen storage from only 1 day of use versus 5 days of use. Now, for long term, which one is going to be better for your insulin sensitivity? Because it's not just the fact you take insulin, it's the insulin has to work. If you do 5 days a week for 10 years, that insulin's not doing much on year 10. Your insulin sensitivity is down the drain. Well, if you're only taking it 1 day a week for 10 years, you're probably still pretty sensitive down the road. And that's just 1 day a week. If you have 2 high days a week, you might get 36 hours a week where enough insulin is above the effective dose level to get benefits of it, as opposed to only 15 hours taking it with every workout. So now you're more than double the effectiveness, and you're only using it 2 days a week as opposed to 5 days a week.
Yeah, given that it sounds like there's kind of a cyclical nature of using it too, where if you use too much of it for a prolonged period of time, you're going to reduce your sensitivity and reduce the efficacy. But then it sounds like a great thing for some competitors to use, because like if they're competing at least once per year, then they're at least going through one period of the year where if they're only using it on high days, they are at most using it once per week in prep. Yep. If that even, you might not even need it in prep because your insulin sensitivity gets better than anyway. But then what if you had someone come to you who they were willing to, diet hard at certain points of the year, hard-ish, and pull back so that they can grow again? Would you be more wary of that kind of person using insulin if they're not really going to push into the low levels of body fat and super high levels of insulin sensitivity through a prep diet?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can't, I mean, you have to pay the piper. You can't like violate the laws of physics. You can can think you are, and because they only happen in the future. And so if you're only thinking of today, you don't think about the future. Because a common thing I see right now is Lantus use. And that kind of ebbs and flows. That was kind of big maybe 15 years ago, I think. When it first came out, I remember when that was, people were really kind of playing with it. And it works because now you don't get 18 hours, you can get 24 hours in that effective range, because you can take a small amount of Lantus and keep yourself right at that, like right on the edge of where you kind of get the actual benefits of insulin, which means any extra like Humalog you take is going to be hyper effective. But the problem is type 2 diabetes. So there's two types of diabetes. There's type 1 diabetes where you like the islets, the beta cells on the islets of the Langerhans of the pancreas don't produce insulin. And it's likely some hereditary component, and it's probably like an autoimmune response. Your body decides the beta cells are a foreign substance that attacks them. Now they can no longer release insulin. So that's one way you don't produce insulin. That's not the diabetes everyone's like, that's not the healthy, unhealthy diabetes. You can be perfectly healthy with type 1 diabetes if you take your insulin properly yourself. If the type 2 is, you've had so much insulin for so much time that those receptors stop paying attention to it. Like you're an alcoholic, first time you drink beer, you drink 3 beers and you're lit, Well, if you drink every night, pretty soon you got to drink a case of beer and you're functional. You got the shakes if you don't drink it. And that's it. Anything's like that. Your receptors are the same. If those receptors are pounding with insulin all the time, they get less responsive. So pretty soon that, like this insulin, they see it, or it doesn't even bind, doesn't even pay attention to it. So you got to take more insulin. Well, when you do that with the Lantus, and I see this a lot because people get the misconception that their blood sugar, well, my A1C, I took Lantus and my A1C went down, my fasted blood sugar went down. And that's, yes, because you're taking insulin, but you're still pumping all that insulin in. You haven't done anything to improve the receptors. And so eventually the receptors are going to get immune to that dose too. And then you're going to have to take more, and then you're going to have to take more, and then you're going to have to take more. And you're becoming a type 2 diabetic without really realizing it, because you're keeping your blood sugars normal you're not keeping your blood sugars normal because your receptors are fresh. You're keeping your blood sugars normal because you're pumping in so much outside insulin into the system.
Where does Metformin come into play here?
What's that?
Where does Metformin or some other insulin sensitivity or like berberine?
Metformin improves the sensitivity of the receptors. So let's say I'm a receptor who got, beat up by insulin so much that I stopped working. I'm all, I always picture receptor something a ball fits into, it sits on a cell. And I've been so beat up, this thing doesn't accept balls anymore. Metformin comes in and works with a cyclic AMP, which is like an anti-inflammatory effect. And it kind of resensitizes that receptor where now the receptor works. The problem with metformin is that cyclic AMP is anti-hypertrophy. It's kind of like ibuprofen. It's counter to the things we're trying to do with protein synthesis. Now, if you're on insulin, GH, and anabolics, it's probably not going to make a difference. I always say it's like adding a deck chair to the Titanic. Yes, the Titanic weighs more when you add a deck chair to it, but it doesn't really affect the weight of the Titanic. But we don't want to affect growth at all. We don't want to do anything to be negative hypertrophy if we can, which is why I prefer berberine. Berberine works through IGF-1 and it's a weird pathway because IGF-1 is actually insulinogenic. It's actually more insulinogenic on a milligram for milligram basis than actual insulin. But everyone knows IGF-1, that's like the holy grail. And the same thing, deck chair, Titanic, is it, affecting IGF-1 enough that it's actually going to improve growth, like if you're taking Increlex? No. But if we have two options that both increase the sensitivity to the receptors, and one of them fights against hypertrophy and one of them improves hypertrophy, might as well do the one that improves hypertrophy. And for those listening, my favorite berberine product is Suppressor by First Attachment Nutrition.
I will say too that I've been using Suppressor daily, and I definitely feel like, especially through the early stages of prep, I feel like it helps a ton with insulin sensitivity, and it's probably the best.
We have some real world data because I had a lot. I'm not just a bodybuilding coach. I'm not really a nutritionist by degree. I'm an exercise physiologist by undergrad degree, but I worked for a cardiology group. I was a nutritionist for a cardiology group, and I still have like probably 10% of my clients are complete, like don't even work out. They're, IBS, Crohn's, SIBO, Candida, or or diabetics or things like that. And so I have some real true type 2 diabetics with real world data improving their A1C and blood sugars on Suppressor. I mean, we've seen it with berberine in general, but the problem with berberine is it's broken down by the body. It's not very bioavailable. It needs to be bound with something like cinnamon or bioperine, black pepper. And so you'll see a lot of companies just sell berberine. And actually, I mean, if you're going to someone that's not third-party tested, you don't know what you're getting, you know, and anyone who just throw berberine without other ingredients that would make berberine more bioavailable is very likely also not even selling berberine at all. So, but if you have a reputable brand with berberine, and by reputable brand, what my data is with Suppressor, and we had a client who was running, I think his standard fasted glucose was like 170-ish for a while. He's had a couple days now under 100, and his A1C went from like 6.4 or something like that to, I want to say, and maybe even high, I think it was over 7, and now I think he's like 5.7 now or something, or 5.8. Yeah, I mean, this has been, because this was people we got like the very first samples, you know, when we did our first sample runs, we got these to these clients, and so they've been on them now for nearly a year, you know, since last August or September, you know. But it's, yeah, I mean, it's real, it works, you know. I mean, it works. I mean, Metformin works. In my experience, 1,500 milligrams of proper berberine mixed with, you know, like cinnamon or something that will actually help it. And you know, we have RALA and stuff also, but 1,500 milligrams of berberine a day is roughly as effective as about 1,000 milligrams of metformin, you know, give or take. It's not like I have 10,000 person studies to run it with, but I've had, you know, hundreds of clients over years, and I've seen what that dose of metformin does and what that dose of berberine does.
That's super interesting.
This is a bit different from the original question, but now I'm just kind of curious. So we've talked a bit about like why you don't want to use insulin too much or too often, but at what point might you tell a client like, hey, maybe this is a good idea now? Because I mean, I like your approach to using insulin seems more to be, whereas other people say, oh, I want to get huge, I should use insulin. You're more like, I need to eat X amount of carbs to keep making the progress I want to make, and therefore insulin will be useful to use those carbs. So at what point do you have someone who's eating so many carbs that you say, okay, maybe you but maybe insulin would really help shuttle these carbs in on a high day, for instance?
Yeah, I'll say, and I'll kind of take it from a different approach, because I won't say it's an actual amount. It's because it's really, there isn't like a set amount, but from my view, everyone uses insulin wrong, completely wrong, which is why insulin gets a bad rep and why people think insulin makes you fat. So what people do is they pick a dose of insulin, 10 IUs of insulin, if you log, and then they eat enough carbs to cover that insulin. Well, you don't know if that meal will make you fat. You don't know if you can handle that much carbs. You don't know if you can handle that many calories. So people take insulin, get hypo, pig out, eat a bunch of shit, bunch of sugar, and then get fat and say, well, insulin made me fat. Well, no, if you do it correctly, insulin will keep you leaner. And I'll explain why. Say you're eating your high carb day, whatever it is, 500 grams of carbs, 600 grams of carbs, you're eating that high day. Say you've been eating that for 3 months and we have it dialed in and you're not getting fat from it, right? Now we add insulin to the equation. We're not eating any more calories. We're eating the exact same diet. So thermodynamics is unchanged. Thermodynamics is unchanged. We're eating the exact same diet. Now we add the insulin to it. What does insulin do? The insulin increases the likelihood that some of those carbs that previously would have been stored as fat, or may have been, will now not be stored as fat, they'll be stored as glycogen. We're increasing the probability that some of that protein that wasn't getting synthesized to new muscle, now we've increased the rate of amino acid uptake at the cell. We're increasing the potential for muscle protein synthesis. Now some of that protein can get stored as muscle also. So we're eating the same calories, we're just making better use of those calories, which means we'll actually be leaner by the use of insulin. So the way to use insulin is to have your diet, map out your diet, plan your diet, and then add insulin to improve the nutrient partitioning of that diet, as opposed to take some insulin and then eat so you don't die, because you don't know if you can eat that much. You don't know so that's why everyone uses it wrong. If you use insulin correctly, Emilio Sanchez was on to this 20 years ago. You know, the guy was in contest shape for the last 30 years. not just, you know, while he competed. He was in shape all year while he competed, but he's in shape at 60 years old now, using insulin all the time. If you use it correctly, like, you know, have your diet, then you dose the insulin to improve the diet without changing the diet, you'll actually be leaner.
For more content like this, visit www.teamtroponin.com.